We'll start by making the pocket. Now, as I said before, you can use this as an internal pocket. I'm making it as the external one. This is piece C. You want to take your lining piece that has been interfaced and your fabric piece, and you want to line them up with the raw edges matching at the top. Make sure everything's lined up. You can pin or clip together, and then we're going to sew along that, just that top edge, with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So my machine is threaded up with, I've got a universal needle size 90 is a good one for this. So just a sort of medium to heavy universal needle. I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and I've just got my regular sew-all thread in my bobbin and in my thread. So this leatherette, if you've not used it before, is just really easy to sew with. Finish with a back stitch. There we go. Okay, so fold your lining fabric back and away from your leatherette fabric and press. You want to keep the iron away from the leatherette, but it's okay to go on the lining. And then we're going to do an understitch. So we're going to stitch down here through the seam allowance. The seam allowance is all pressed this way, and we're going to stitch the lining fabric to the seam allowance at a couple of millimetres in from the edge. So find your reference point. I can just see my fabric in the window of my presser foot there. So there's that stitch there. That just makes the lining fabric roll to the inside, keeps it all looking neat. So just fold that over, and the fact that you've done that stitch there, it will kind of create like a barrier for when you fold over. And you just want to press that in half. And now the leatherette, obviously it can't take much heat, and this black one is quite spongy and doesn't want to be heavily pressed. So you can just put some clips along the top edge if you want to hold that fold in place. And then what we're going to do next is come around to the right side, and we're going to top stitch down here. And this top stitch can be 1.5 centimetres down from the edge. So I've got my top stitch needle and my top stitch thread, and I'm using a normal bobbin. So I don't have top stitch thread in my bobbin, I just have normal thread in my bobbin. I want to do a stitch through all layers 1.5 centimetres down. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to be really careful to keep nice and straight with my top stitching. I'm not going to do a back stitch at the beginning and end. I'll tie off the thread tails, and they will get hidden in the seam allowance when we make the bag. I don't want to leave the clips on there for too long actually, so if you're using clips on this leatherette, do try to take them off. Don't sort of leave them there in between, you know, if you're making this bag over several days, because they might mark it. Oh, and I forgot to say I've increased my stitch length to 3.5 to make an attractive top stitch there. And there's my top stitch. So take one of your interfaced bag panels and place your pocket on top, matching up the bottom raw edges. Clip through all layers to hold your pocket in place. So double check that this top edge looks straight, that it's not higher up on one side than it is on the other. You can measure it if you want. Don't worry if it doesn't completely match up at the bottom, as long as this part here is even on both sides. You really want that to be the case. You don't want that pocket to look like it's slanting at all. Now we're going to stitch the pocket to your bag fabric. Well, if we started here, came down, went around and went up here. The tendency is for the machine to push the fabric slightly, and this will end up higher and this will end up lower, and you will get a slant. So when I stitch my pocket to my bag, I start at the center bottom and work my way up, so I'm exerting a symmetrical force on the pocket piece when I'm attaching it, and that way it's more likely to end up straight at the top. So you want to sew this line sort of within the 1 centimetre seam allowance, because you don't want this stitch to be showing on the outside. Next we'll move on to making the internal pocket. So you want to take your piece of lining fabric and your piece of your main bag fabric, put those together right sides together, and then we can just clip or pin around the outside edge. You're going to sew both layers together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, leaving a gap at the bottom so that you can turn the whole thing through. So you want to continue all the way around the outside with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So you will have left a gap at the bottom of your project. You just need to trim away the corners, making sure that you don't cut through your stitching. And then you can turn that pocket through the gap that you left at the bottom. Once you've done that, then gently use a point turner to push out the corners of your pocket. Just be careful not to push too hard or you'll get a pokey shape. And then tucking the raw edges in, you can give that a press. I'm pressing on the cotton side because I don't want to iron the leather. So in a minute we're going to sew this pocket to your bag lining, and that will close that gap at the bottom. But first what we'll do is we will do a top stitch across the top of the pocket at 1.5 centimetres down to match the outside pocket. So I'm using my top stitch thread, I'm 1.5 centimetres in, and I'm going to sew through all layers to create a nice top stitch, and this is just for decoration. So you can see the top stitch there. Okay, I'm going to pull my thread tails through to the back. That just allows me to tie them off neatly. That looks a bit neater than having a back stitch when we're sewing with top stitching thread. Okay, so it's time to add our pocket to our bag. And I want my pocket to sit 4 centimetres down from the top edge and at the halfway point. So you can sort of fold your bag panel lining panel in half to get your halfway point, and then you can measure down 4 centimetres from the top edge. Make a mark. I'm using a heat erasable pen, and then I'm folding my pocket in half just to line that up. I've got my leatherette side facing out, so it just provides a little contrast when I open my bag. So that's my pocket position there. Make sure it's nice and straight, and also make sure that it's central to your lining panel. So it should be the same distance in from each side. Once you're happy with the position of your pocket, you can pin it in place. I'm just going to use pins here because it's floating in the middle of the lining panel, and I won't leave those pins in there for long because I don't want to mark my leatherette. Okay, so back over to my regular sewing machine. I will just sew right on the edge there, all the way around the side and bottom of my patch pocket. Do a back stitch, to begin, and then off I go. You can use your self-leveling button if the bulk of that pocket prevents you from starting. Round the corner there, along the bottom. And then back up to where you started. Now you have got a little point of weakness at the pocket at the top here. So I do like to go back over the top and reinforce that. So I'm going to trace over the top of those stitches and I'm going to do a little triangle at the top edge of each pocket, just because you don't want that coming undone with use, because it'd be very difficult to repair. So why not take the opportunity just to reinforce the top of that pocket now. So just come across 3 or 4 stitches and then come back down to make a little triangle shape at the top edge of that pocket, back stitch there. So you can see that just gives that a little bit of extra strength at the top of that pocket there. Okay, so those are your pockets attached. So you have your lining pocket and your exterior pocket, and that is the back and front finish. So the next thing that we want to do is to just attach the lining panels to the back and front panels. So we'll match up the lining panel that doesn't have a pocket with the front panel that does, and the lining panel with a pocket with the front panel that doesn't. Make sure there's no bits in between there. We're going to put them together with wrong sides together so that the right sides are facing the outside. Line up the raw edges there. We'll clip together and then we're going to sew all the way around the edge. Now don't worry about the fact that the raw edges will be showing, because we're going to come to that later. So just for now, line up the raw edges and clip together all the way around the edge. And then we're just going to sew all the way around the edge with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. We just want to be actually just inside, so like just inside of the 1 centimetre. So I've clipped that all the way around there on both the front and back panels. So you should find that you're sewing just outside of the foam area, because of course the foam itself is 1 centimetre in from the back panel. And we're sewing all the way around the edge there. Just take your time. 1 clip space at a time. You don't want the 2 pieces to slide away from each other. Take it nice and easy around the corners there. And I'll just keep going until I've come all the way around. And you want those 2 pieces to sit nice and flat. You don't want them to be sort of pulling on each other. And this stitch that you're doing now will eventually be hidden when we attach the side panel to the front and back panel. I'm back where I started now. So I'll just finish with the back stitch. And repeat on both sides.